Happy Valentine's Day to you all out there. A Friday Valentine's Day. To those of you who have a significant other, I hope you have found a way to celebrate. For those of you who don't, well, having money and free time doesn't necessarily suck either. So much to get to on today's rundown, starting with the question, to tee or not to tee? And that is in relationship to the Bengals wide receiver, Tee Higgins, who is pending a return to the Bengals, which is seeming less and less likely as they go along, unless we get a franchise tag, is expected to hit the open market in the NFL. The Broncos, obviously a team in desperate need of help at the offensive skill positions. Wide receiver is one of them, and you could debate whether or not it's more or less attractive than a tight end or a running back. But one thing's for sure, Tee Higgins is going to be the belle of the ball in free agency at the wide receiver position. And the irony is that if Tee Higgins does in fact divorce from the Cincinnati Bengals, the Denver Broncos are currently the odds-on favorite to land him. Now, it's not necessarily a runaway race. The Washington Commanders and Pittsburgh Steelers, Los Angeles Chargers are kind of nipping right at the Broncos' proverbial heels. But I do think it's interesting that the Broncos, who, again, the narratives that we've been told coming out of their rookie season with Bo Nix, they're in cap hell. They have so many other ramifications after the departure of Russell Wilson and other positions of need that they need to pay, that I'm not sure they're going to be able to spend that kind of money on a wide receiver. Well, I don't necessarily agree. I think the NFL salary cap, unlike the National Hockey League and other professional organizations, the salary cap in the NFL seems to be by far the most manipulative. It kind of, and this is something we saw with Sean Payton Saints teams for a long time, in fact, and why some Saints fans may tell you they're not big fans of Sean Payton, because he left them with quite a big mess that they're still trying to dig their way out of. But the Broncos, who are still not fully out of the Russell Wilson contract yet, but they have a significantly lesser amount that they have to take on the nose. They're sitting right around that $50 million dead cap summary. And that, ironically, is right around the league average. So almost, if not just over, 50% of the teams in the NFL have the same or slightly more dead cap money or less cap space to work with than the Broncos do. So I think that the Broncos, from a money standpoint, a financial standpoint, they're able to go after a guy like Tee Higgins and command the 25 plus, $25 to $30 million a year range that a wide receiver like Tee Higgins is going to command. The question is, should they? I have raised this question to James Palmer and to many people around here at our station over the course of the last couple of weeks, as we've seen other players, the likes of Cooper Kupp, the likes of Deebo Samuel, etc., players who also play wide receiver have become available for various different reasons from their teams. I was not that excited or high about Deebo Samuel. I think that the role that he plays in San Francisco isn't 100% transferable to what he would have here in Denver. And I think that the lack of production, or the steady decline in production at like a 15 to 20% decrease consistently year after year since 2021, when he was a first team All-Pro and had 1,400 yards and 13 total touchdowns. He has not been able to keep that pace, even with devastating injuries and inconsistencies with the skill positions on San Francisco around him. Christian McCaffrey missing significant time, Brandon Ayuk missing time, Jawan Jennings missing significant time. All of these players who would theoretically eat into Deebo Samuel's ability to produce, he didn't make up any ground with them being out. Ricky Pearsall, a promising rookie who missed a lot of time for San Francisco this past year. And Deebo he was not the one filling that void. And that concerns me for a guy who's nearing the age of 30. And there's been concerns about whether or not he's in the same physical shape to kind of take on the unique bruising role that he does as a wide receiver, kind of scat back, running back hybrid, do whatever you want type of player. So I was not that excited really about Deebo Samuel. I think the principle of Cooper Kupp excites me. Cooper Kupp, a guy who, again, just back in 2021, a handful of years ago, when the Rams are winning a Super Bowl in their first year with Matthew Stafford, I guess this is appropriate for Valentine's Day. I think I'm in love with the idea of a Cooper Kupp. I just don't know if I'm in love with Cooper Kupp. I think that even a guy who's north of 30 at age 32, or he would be at the time of the season, is still somebody who can make plays. He's clearly not athletically at the peak that he probably was 3 or 4 years ago. Certainly not before that. And I think in part that is due to the fact that he was asked to do a lot of demanding physical things as a wide receiver in LA. He was heavily involved in Sean McVay's blocking game, not just blocking other DBs and nickel corners and things of that nature, but like getting in and being like a secondary tight end along the line and chipping edge rushers and having to square up on linebackers and pseudo defensive linemen on a play-to-play basis. And I think that eventually does take a toll on somebody who's now north of 30, which is funny that that's considered like ancient by NFL terms. But I sit here right now as someone who's turning 32 in the calendar year of 2025. So I think I'm in love with the idea of Cooper Kupp more than I am Cooper Kupp himself, although I think that he would be a better option than a Deebo Samuel. But as it relates to Tee Higgins, that does excite me a little bit. And I know there are detractors who say, our own Cecil Lammy and others who said, well, Tee Higgins has never faced number one level competition, or he's never faced a number one corner from an opposing defense because he plays opposite of Jamar Chase, the most recent Triple Crown winner in the NFL and one of the best wide receivers in football. And while I would say, okay, yes, that's true. I don't think that there were a lot of teams where Jamar Chase was healthy and in the lineup that would put their star defender one-on-one against Tee Higgins and leave Jamar Chase open on the other side, or at least with lesser competition. But I think that that's true of a lot of wide receivers around the NFL. And it just because you are not facing the best defensive matchup from the other team doesn't mean that you aren't capable of doing so when asked to do so. Is there anything that when you look at Tee Higgins, who stands fairly north of 6 foot, has a stout frame, has shown jump ball ability and 50-50 ball capacity, and somebody who lit up the Broncos to the tune of 3 touchdowns just last season in what turned into kind of a nice thrilling finish. Is there anything that when you look at him that you don't think he'd be capable of shouldering a burden like that? Or at a minimum, he wouldn't be a massive upgrade over what we have right now? And that's not a shot or a slight toward Courtland Sutton, because he's done, admirable in the role that he's been asked to fill. And Courtland Sutton, conversely, has faced number one competition in every single game the Broncos have played, and probably has had to deal with double teams because there's so much else lacking around Courtland Sutton that defenses can command extra attention on the one weapon that they do have. So I understand the pushback a little bit there, but I disagree with it, especially when you consider that it is a position of need for the Broncos. And yes, they invested in it as it relates to the draft with Troy Franklin and Devon Vele in the later rounds and things like that. And you want those guys to take a second step. You want Marvin Mims to take a third step. All of that's fine. But I don't think you can just use hope as a strategy that those two are going to take another big leap and bound in order to compensate for the kind of production you could get from bringing in a guy like a Tee Higgins. I think Chris Godwin would be like a secondary player underneath there, maybe between a Tee Higgins and a Cooper Kupp, Deebo Samuel kind of list if I were to make one. So if I'm sitting here right now on Friday, February 14th, 2025, I would cast my vote in the yes column as it relates to Tee Higgins. I have another question as it relates to the Broncos before we get into some thrilling USA hockey in the Four Nations Faceoff that I want to get to with Will Peterson, but I'll bring him in just a smidge early here to ask my secondary question as it relates to the Denver Broncos, which was the title of our show today. What, Will Peterson, do you think a joker for Sean Payton? Because if you haven't heard him talk about it, just wait 30 more seconds. I'm sure he'll bring it up.
Yep.
What do you think a joker looks like for Sean Payton as it relates to the position that you would target to fill that need?
See, I think everyone says it has to be a running back or a tight end. I'm not so sure it can't be a wide receiver, because I think it's someone who you don't know where they're going to line up on the field and can command the attention of the defense on literally every single snap. In fact, I think they already have a joker on their roster in Marvin Mims Jr. We'll just have to see if he wants to upgrade said joker or have two jokers. And of course, the most popular name attached to that right now, at least, is Deebo Samuel. We'll see if like a Tyler Warren could play that role, and Ashton Ginty, whatever. But in the moment, everyone says, well, it has to be running back tight end. It has to be running back tight end. I'm not so sure. I think it can be a wide receiver as well.
I think it could be. And I've heard the pushback as it relates to before you walked in. I did say that I'm not excited by the prospect of bringing in a nearly 30 Deebo Samuel for a guy who has steadily declined in production on a significant level for several straight years, despite the fact that the supporting cast around him, albeit talented, has dealt with injuries, and none of that production was filled by Deebo Samuel. He still continued to decrease, even when Christian McCaffrey is missing all or the majority of a season with injuries, or Ricky Pearsall is out for the majority of a season, or Jennings, or what have you, Brandon Ayuk, etc. And I've heard the same pushback against Deebo Samuel be used in the form of, well, we already have a Deebo Samuel in Marvin Mims. And I would caution that just a smidge, because I know that Deebo Samuel, I kind of, laid out a negative path, toward his production, in the last handful of minutes or so. But I don't know that Marvin Mims will be able to reach the ceiling that Deebo Samuel has already reached and may never get back to. So I think if it's fair if you want to say that we have our version of a Deebo Samuel here in Denver, but I don't think you could go much further than that to say that Marvin Mims and Deebo Samuel are comparative as a player archetype. Deebo Samuel's much bigger, and I think you can do much more with him than the Broncos did with Marvin Mims, which I think was done out of force of circumstance to a certain degree, because Sean Payton didn't feel like he had any other tools in the cupboard to be able to use.
Yeah, I mean, if Marvin Mims ever has a season in Denver like Deebo Samuel had in 2021 with the 49ers, we'll be dancing through the streets. Heck, we might be throwing a parade through the streets, because Deebo in 2021, I don't have the numbers right.
It was close to 2,000 total yards and 14 touchdowns.
I mean, it was absurd. So I know, like Chris Harris Jr., who we all love and respect, Super Bowl 50 champ, said, why would you trade for Deebo? We already have Deebo. I think that's where that narrative kind of began. But yeah, I think with Mims, if he could be even 3/4 or 60% of what Deebo was in 2021, you would be elated. That said, the Broncos are going to go shopping for a big name wide receiver. It just all arrows point to that. And you can go through the 6 guys. I think the 6 names are Chris Godwin and Tee Higgins, who are free agents, Cooper Kupp and Deebo Samuel, who you could trade for, Devontae Adams, who you could trade for. And then to me, the prize of them all is Garrett Wilson, who you could trade for. But I think one of those 6 names, more likely than not, will be a Denver Bronco over some point in the next month.
Could be, yeah, and with some of those, particularly with Garrett Wilson, you have to. The other team has to be willing to play ball. I think that some of those are more attainable than others, and the price tag is certainly different than others. Anything involving Garrett Wilson, I think, is going to cost you number 20,
which is fine.
Yeah, because who's
going to be more productive next year, Garrett Wilson or some safety out of South Carolina?
That is the question. Is if but what would mean more to the offense? In 2025, a Garrett Wilson or an Ashton Ginty that projects the way that we think he's going to. And again, that's a speculation. So those are the conversations that you have to have. And while I think that it could be a wide receiver, it being the joker that Sean Payton keeps searching for, because we saw that Michael Thomas filled that role for a little bit, almost in like a Cooper Kupp sense, the slant god that can just eat the middle of the field and can be creative with his route running to provide a safety valve for Bo Nix and find the soft spots in the defenses. We saw it happen with a tight end. We saw Jimmy Graham be split out wide and used in such a variety of non-traditional ways for a tight end, to the degree that when his contract negotiations came up, he actually argued to be tagged as a wide receiver by New Orleans instead of a tight end because of his usage rate and how different it was, especially at that time.
And the money's pretty significantly
significant. Yeah. And we've seen it happen with Sean Payton numerous times at the running back position. You could argue that Reggie Bush, Alvin Kamara, and Darren Sproles at one point all played that role for Sean Payton. I think that you can find one at any of those 3 positions, but I am actually going to stake my claim in the position that you actually negated right off the bat, which is I think the best chance to find one for Sean Payton, especially if we're looking for it this year, is at the running back position, because there is a depth of running backs that can be used in various ways. And after Ashton Genty, the obvious front runner, there are still capable backs and bodies who will be there in the second, third, and maybe even fourth rounds. Guys like Devin Neal and Cam Scatabo and, the like. A lot of them, frankly, we got to watch play here in the, Big 12 watching the University of Colorado.
Sure.
So I think that position, because of the ability that you have to obviously impact the running game as a running back, but the creativity and the different things that you can do as a running back to impact the receiving game, the blocking game, and the running game all in one, I think give you more flexibility to make an impact than a tight end who's kind of, you're either in line or you're out line, and a wide receiver where it just kind of becomes, where do we line you up and what kind of motion do we use? So that would be, if I was to speculate what I think Sean Payton's Joker looks like in its best form, I think it is that Reggie Bush, Alvin Kamara, Darren Sproles to archetype, more so than it is a Jimmy Graham or even a Michael Thomas. And I think it would be easier to fill that role in the draft versus the others maybe in free agency or at different points.
Yeah, that's all fair, especially because running back is such a glaring need on this roster, right? Like to me, it's the number one hole, maybe tight end. Like you could flip a coin on that, but I mean, whoever they draft, Richie, because they're going to draft a running back in the first 3 rounds. Let's just call it like it is.
I think that's
first
fair.
3 rounds, they will draft a running back. Whoever they draft immediately is going to come in and be the starter from day one. That's tremendous pressure on the draft pick, first of all, to just walk into an NFL locker room, hey, you're our starting running back. And second of all, it's also tremendous pressure that you're throwing out names like Alvin Kamara and Reggie Bush, who were great NFL players. Like, the fan base is going to have sky-high expectations for whoever this running back is that joins the Broncos in late April, and it'll be fascinating to see how it plays out.
Yeah, I think the fun exercise to run that through when you talk about impact is like you named off the 3 positions of obvious need on the offensive side of the ball: wide receiver, tight end, and running back. If you were to take 3 of the best players at those positions in the NFL in, let's say, Saquon Barkley, Jamar Chase, and Brock Bowers, right? Who may, even though he's a rookie, may be the best tight end in football right now.
The Super Bowl's over. I don't know if he's a rookie anymore. I think he's a second-year player now.
That's true. Fresh into his sophomore year.
Yeah. Like, Bo's no longer, we no longer say rookie QB Bo Nix. We just say QB Bo Nix. Yes.
Sophomore Brock Bowers, Jamar Chase, and Saquon Barkley. If you were to take those 3 players and implant them individually, one by one on the Broncos, which individual won't have the most impact? I think it's clearly Saquon Barkley. The way he transformed Philly's offense and the things that he could do here in Denver. So that's, I think, maybe also what's skewing my direction. But we'll see, because free agency has to happen before the draft. So we can talk about all this thing about, the Broncos are going to, they need to address running back in the first round, and Ashton Genty, will he be there? Will he not? Or Tyler Warren. Well, maybe they go out and get Aaron Jones in free agency. And then it's like, well, you're probably not going to draft Ashton Genty in the first round after paying Aaron Jones all that money. So now maybe we're looking at Tyler Warren or at the kid from Michigan, Colston Loveland, or whatever. So one's got to happen before the other. But as of now, that would be how I would imagine in my head the perfect scenario would be for the Joker. We had another fantastic hockey game last night, as if the kickoff to this highly anticipated 4 Nations Faceoff, which may be a one and done, which we'll get to, maybe early next week in terms of some of the legislation and things that are coming out of the NHL and the Olympic hockey world. As if the kickoff with Team Canada and Sweden couldn't have been any more dramatic and exciting. We got another great game, a little bit better if you were voting for Team USA versus Finland, last night, as Team USA hammered Finland 6-1 in a game that shockingly was a lot closer than the scoreboard entailed into, I would say, the waning minutes of the second period there.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, it was 1-1 late in the second. You felt like Finland was just trying to hang on and get to the third period tied, and the U.S. makes it 2-1 late in the second, and then I hope you didn't go get dinner or whatever, because it was 4-1 like that in the third period, then 5-1, then they added the late one to make it 6-1. But you're right. People are going to look at that and go, wow, what a mismatch. That was a really competitive hockey game for the first 37, 38 minutes of it. And I think Finland just wore down. I mean, you look at the Finnish roster and you're like, who are half these dudes, right? Like, they're not household names, whereas every guy in the United States, if you even mildly follow hockey, you have heard of before. And I think what we're seeing in this tournament is that, yes, the U.S. and Canada will play tomorrow night. I'm sure we'll get to that, and that's going to be marquee. But the fact that Canada couldn't beat Sweden in regulation means that if they lose to the U.S. in regulation, who looked like an absolute wagon last night, Sweden could sneak back in based on this point system. The broadcast referenced that on ESPN. So treat USA Canada tomorrow night as a big, big deal, which it is, and don't assume, well, I'm going to get a rematch in 5 days in the title game anyway, because depending on that result, US looked really, really good. Sweden could sneak in there, and Canada could shockingly not make the title game.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting because, again, if I'm Team USA and I'm watching that Canada-Sweden game with Canada, who is just so loaded from forwards to defensemen, they have one of the most illegal-looking power play one units that you could put on paper. And the way that they score in the first minute of the game, where you have a sequence where Sidney Crosby, Connor McDavid, and Nathan McKinnon all touch the puck en route to a goal in the first 60 seconds of the game. And then Sweden kind of rallies back and holds on, and Team Canada, as strong as they are, needs overtime to do it. If I'm Team USA, that's like a wake-up call for me of like, hang on now. Like, because Team USA is arguably just as strong from a skater standpoint as Team Canada, and they're definitely stronger between the pipes with Connor Hellebuck. Sure. But this is one of those like, hey, don't overlook the little guy kind of thing, because Sweden was scrappy, and Finland, to their credit, they played the perfect kryptonite strategy for Team USA, who's so fast and fluid and can outskate anybody, similar to how we talk about the Colorado Avalanche a lot of the time. But they slowed down the pace of play. They grounded out in the offensive zone, cycling the puck with extended forechecks, and they prevented Team USA's, skill position players from being able to maximize what they're best at. And that's how you end up giving up the first goal of the game, which Hellebuck just let one past him, and you're thinking, okay, well, that's not a good sign.
Everyone's saying, oh, it's playoff Hellebuck. It's playoff Hellebuck.
Yep, exactly.
He looked pretty good the rest of the way.
He did. You give up the first goal of the game, and you find yourself in a 1-1 stalemate late in the second period. You go into the third period up 2-1. And then, like you said, before you could blink, you've got Tkachuk number 1, Gensel, and Tkachuk number 2 scoring a goal in a span of what felt like 90 seconds. Yeah. Like you, me, and Finland's penalty kill couldn't catch their breath before it was all over.
No, I think the United States sent a message last night of, hey, there's all these stats about Sidney Crosby, and he never loses for Team Canada, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think the way the U.S. played last night, in my eyes, Richie, they are a slight favorite to win this tournament. I just think as we sit here at this moment, now that being said, anything can happen in a title game, and it will probably be U.S.-Canada, even though I brought up that doomsday scenario for the Canadians. But I just think that the way the U.S. turned on the gas, like you said, boom, 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 to start that third period, I think they sent a message to Team Canada that, hey, we may be in your country. They're in Montreal right now, but this thing's moving to Boston, and we're coming for you next week. And on Saturday in the preliminary.
You want to boo the national anthem? Okay, watch this.
They did boo the national anthem.
Yeah, that's just and which is weird because I just feel like national anthems, like across a lot of nationalities, they sound cool. I think they're just designed to be cool songs. So when it wasn't just like a smattering of like a couple people that were like, no, boo. It was loud and contentious. They are not fans of Team USA up there in Montreal, and I understand.
There's a political element.
Yes, I understand.
We're not going to get into that, but we can't.
I understand.
We can't ignore that it wasn't just rivalry stuff. There was a political element as well.
But yeah, no, I think that to your point, when you're comparing Team USA and Canada, who will play each other tomorrow, one, getting a regulation win for Team USA in terms of the point standings and the way that this tournament is designed is massive, because Canada loses a point by default by having to go to overtime to defeat the team that they were heavy favorites against. And that extra point, depending on how this game on Saturday shakes out and a couple of other factors, could be a huge buffer for them, in the same way that I think in Team USA versus Canada as a matchup, evenly matched to a certain degree, or you're splitting hairs between an A- and an A as it relates to their defensive pairings and their forward lines for each team. The goaltending situation, the difference between Connor Hellebuck when he's at his best and the goaltenders for Team Canada is significant enough that I think that if I'm Team Canada, there is a little bit of extra pressure of, we got to put some pucks in the net, because this guy and this team is going to be able to do it to us.
Oh, totally. I mean, Jordan Binnington, we got quite a history with Jordan Binnington here in Colorado, throwing water bottles at Nazem Kadri and whatnot. It's got to be weird, honestly, for Nathan McKinnon and Cale Makar and Devon Toews to play in front of Jordan Binnington. But yes, I mean, Binnington and Hellebuck aren't even in the same sentence in my eyes. So, by the way, there's that Mackenzie Blackwood guy. He's not on the roster.
A little bit of a snub.
Yeah, Darcy Kemper, Cup champion. He's not on the roster for Canada. But yes, the advantage is in the net. And I will caution folks this about tomorrow night. One team may leave it all out there tomorrow night. That may not be the best strategy because I think these two have been chomping at the bit to play each other. The real title game is next week. Like, no one's going to remember what happens on Saturday if they face each other again in the title game. So I will caution this. I will say whoever wins tomorrow night may end up losing the title game. I would think these two probably split if they meet twice.
Is it crazy that I was thinking when this was going on that, like, as they continued to pour it on, 4-1, 5-1, 6-1, that I was like, do you ever, because I feel like I get this way sometimes in baseball when you see a baseball team win like 14-3, you're like, well, they're gonna have no bats for this next game in 2 days. And I'm like, I'm like, are they putting the gas on too much on when they got a game tomorrow, or at that time it was 2 days away? And I know that hockey players are tough and they rebound, and this is not like, I'm not trying to say that it's insurmountable, but there was a part of me that was like, oh, what are we gonna see these pucks miss the mark? We're going to see a lot more posts on Saturday night against Team Canada because they were just ripping the net against Finland.
Yeah, it's an interesting theory. I mean, you want to keep a few in that chamber, so to speak, right? And I don't think the U.S. used all their goals per se, but you're right. We always hear the term puck luck in hockey. That's a popular phrase. And maybe the puck luck won't go their way on Saturday and they'll lose a game like 3-2 or something like that to Team Canada. So I'm excited, Richie. I mean, this tournament has lived up to all the expectations and then some, and we're just 2 games in. And I think all the naysayers have been silenced in a big, big way. They didn't understand this is not an all-star game. This is not a Pro Bowl. This is country on the front of the jersey, and these guys are going to play hard. And this is elite level hockey. I mean, this looks like Game 7 hockey that we've witnessed. Anyone who thought this was a bad idea is eating a big chunk of crow at the moment.
Yeah, and it could just be a one and done. We could go back to an Olympic kind of format, but if this is the only one we get, it's been good. And you mentioned puck luck. We saw the brothers, Matthew and Brady Tkachuk, become the first brothers ever to each score multiple goals in an NHL international tournament game ever. And it was a fascinating stat that I'll give credit to NHL PR for putting out there. Do you know who the last player was to score a hat trick in NHL international tournament play was?
Any country? Man, I mean, your mind just immediately goes to Wayne Gretzky. That would be my guess. But given that you're asking me this, I'm wondering if there's a Colorado tie to it. So I will change my answer. Joe Sakic.
Well, it's neither. I think you were deducing right there that there's some kind of connection, but the connection was not to Colorado. The connection is to the Tkachuk family because answer is Keith Tkachuk, Matthew and Brady's father.
Yeah, that's a good one.
So Matthew and Brady set an NHL record, or having an NHL first in international tournament play in this game against Finland. And the last player to accomplish an even similar feat, which would be a hat trick by a single player in NHL tournament play, was their own father, Keith Tkachuk.
Wow, that's pretty darn cool.
It was a 2004 quarterfinals game, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, the Tkachuk family, man, talk about living up to the name that in international play to do what Brady and Matthew did last night after Keith was the last guy with a hat trick. Clearly the Tkachuks, red-blooded Americans, baby. They get up for this stuff.
I don't know if Matthew and Brady have a third Tkachuk brother, but if they do, he better be awesome at something because everybody else in the family.
His name's probably Cooper Tkachuk, right?
Like, I didn't even know.
No,
Cooper Manning.
That was a Manning
Cooper
joke.
Manning.
That was a Manning joke.
I got it. I was like, did I really miss that? I would have.
No, it's a Manning joke.
Too funny.
We love Cooper, but it's probably kind of hard to be Cooper Manning. I get that. So
living through Arch. Well, Will, thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate you coming in and chopping it up with me. It's been exciting to watch all this hockey, and I love getting a chance to reenact it with you or hash it up with you every week. So thank you again, and I will see you next week. Actually, I won't see you for a little bit because you're
jet setting a little.
You're jet setting a little bit.
I'm taking my own All-Star break, Richie.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm an All-Star, but I'm taking a break.
On the All-Star break. Will Peterson said, "You know what? That sounds good to me too."
Well,
Will,
thanks,
thank you so much. I appreciate it. To all of you out there, I appreciate all of your insight, all of your feedback, and I can't wait to catch up with you again on Tuesday, same time, same place. I do what I love what I do. Second nature to put in the work.